The sun eventually set. The young man kept watching it for a long time until it disappeared behind the white houses surrounding the square. He thought that when this very same sun had risen in the morning, he had been on another continent, a shepherd, owning 6 sheep, and had a moment with one of the merchant's daughters in the barn. He knew everything that could happen as he crossed the fields. But now the sun had set, and he was in a strange country where he didn't even understand the language people spoke. He was no longer a shepherd, no longer owned anything, not even the money needed to go back and start over. And all this, he said to himself, between one sunrise and the next sunset. He began to pity himself, thinking how things in life can change in a moment, even before a person has enough time to get used to them. He felt ashamed to cry, for he had never cried in front of his sheep. But the market square was wide, and he was far from his homeland. So he cried. He cried because the sky didn't seem fair, because it rewarded people in this way, people who believe in their dreams. When I was with my sheep, I was happy, and I shared my happiness with those around me. People would see me coming and welcome me warmly. But now I am sad and miserable. What will become of me? I will become someone arrogant who trusts no one because someone has deceived me. I will hate all those who find hidden treasures because I did not find mine. And I will forever cling tightly to the little I own because I am afraid of changing my destiny. He opened his bag to see what was inside. Perhaps there was one more bite left from the sandwich he had eaten on the boat. But he found only the big book, his jacket, and the 2 stones the old man had given him. When he saw the stones, he felt great relief. He had exchanged 6 sheep for 2 precious stones taken from a golden breastplate. He could sell them and buy a ticket back home. From now on, he told himself, I will be more careful. He took the stones out to put them in his pocket. This was, after all, a port, and the only thing that man had said correctly was that ports were always full of thieves. Only now did he understand the cafe owner's desperate attempts. He had wanted to warn him not to trust that man. But I'm like everyone else, he thought. I see the world the way I want it to be, not the way it actually is. He kept contemplating the stones, gently touching each one, feeling its warmth and smoothness. They were now his treasure. They reminded him of the old man and what he had told him. When you want something with all your heart, the entire universe conspires to help you achieve it.
He wanted to understand how that could be true while he was standing in an empty market square, penniless, with no flock to watch over during the night. But the stones were proof that he had met a king who knew the story of his life, who knew what he had done with his father's sword, and even knew about his first sexual experience. And these stones could help foresee outcomes. Their names were Urim and Thummim. He put them back in the bag and decided to try them. The old man had told him to ask clear, specific questions because the stones were useless unless the person knew exactly what he wanted. So the young man asked whether the old man's blessing was still upon him. He pulled one stone out. Yes. Then he asked whether he would find his treasure. He put his hand back into the bag and was about to pull out a stone when both stones slipped through a hole in the cloth. He had never noticed his bag was torn. He bent down to pick up Urim and Thummim and return them to the bag. But seeing them on the ground reminded him of another phrase the old king had said: "Learn to recognize omens and follow them." The young man began to laugh silently and placed the stones back in the bag. He had no intention of sewing it shut. The stones could fall through the hole whenever they wanted. He understood that there are things a person should not ask about, so that he does not escape his own destiny. I promised him I would make my own decisions, he told himself. But the stones tell me the old man is still with me. That answer gave him confidence. He looked again at the deserted market and no longer felt the despair he had felt before. This was no longer a strange world, it had become a new world. And wasn't that exactly what he had wanted? To discover new worlds? Even if he never reached the pyramids, he had already gone much farther than any shepherd he knew. If only they knew, he thought. Just 2 hours away by boat lies all of this. The new world now appeared before his eyes in the form of an empty market, but he had already seen it full of life, and he would never forget it. He remembered the sword. He had paid a high price to contemplate it for a moment, but he had never seen anything like it before. Suddenly, he felt he had 2 choices: to look at the world as a miserable victim of a thief, or as an adventurer searching for treasure. And before sinking into sleep from exhaustion, he thought, "I am an adventurer searching for treasure." A hand shaking his shoulder woke him up. He had fallen asleep in the middle of the market square, which was now coming back to life. He looked around for his sheep, then remembered he was in a new world. Instead of sadness, he felt happiness. He no longer needed to search for water and food. He could begin searching for his treasure. The night before, he had chosen to become an adventurer, like the characters in the books he used to read. He began walking slowly through the square. Vendors were setting up their stalls. He helped a man who sold sweets to assemble his stand. The man's face carried a smile unlike the others, a kind, open smile ready to welcome a good day of work. The smile somehow reminded him of the old man, the mysterious king. This vendor does not make sweets because he wants to travel or because he wants to marry a merchant's daughter. He makes sweets because he loves this craft. And he realized he could do what the old man did. He could know whether a person was close to their personal legend or far from it, just by looking at them. It was easy, yet he had never noticed it before. When they finished half the stall, the man offered him the first piece of candy he had made. He devoured it slowly, thanked him, and walked away. A little later, he realized that 2 people had set up the stall together. One spoke Arabic, the other Spanish, yet they understood one another perfectly. There is a language beyond words, he told himself. I already knew that with my sheep, and now I know it with people. He sensed he was on his way to learning many new things, not because they were new, but because they had always crossed his path without him noticing, simply because he was used to them. If I can learn this language that goes beyond words, I will understand the meaning of the world. He decided to walk slowly through the streets of Tangier. This was the only way he could learn to read the omens, and that required great patience. But patience was the first virtue a shepherd learns. Once again, he realized he was applying in this strange land the same lessons he had learned from his sheep. The old man had said, "All things are one." The crystal merchant watched the day break and felt the same anxiety that visited him every morning. He had spent nearly 30 years in this very place, in a shop located at the top of a steep street where customers rarely passed. And now it was too late to change anything, for all he had learned in his life was how to sell crystal pieces. There was a time when his shop was bustling with people, Arab traders, French and English geologists, and German soldiers whose pockets were always full of money. Back then, selling crystal was a successful adventure. He imagined himself becoming a wealthy man, imagined crowds of beautiful women who would be his share in life. But time was gradually lost, just like the city itself. Sita had prospered more than Tangier, and trade had taken a different route. The neighbors left in search of other places, and only a few shops remained on that hill. And it was not possible for many people to climb a steep road for the sake of a few miserable shops. But the crystal merchant had no choice. He had lived 30 years of his life buying and selling crystal pieces, and the time for changing direction had passed. He spent the whole day watching the few passers-by in the small street, and that was what he had been doing for many long years, until he came to know the habits of every person who passed. A few minutes before lunchtime, a foreign young man stopped in front of the glass window. His clothes were fine like everyone else's, but the crystal merchant's trained eyes saw that he was penniless. Nevertheless, he decided to return inside his shop and wait a few minutes until the boy left. There was a sign hanging on the door saying that several languages were spoken there. The young man saw someone appearing from behind the counter and said to him, "If you want, I can clean these vases. No one will buy them in this condition." The merchant looked at him without saying anything. The young man added that he wouldn't need him in the desert anyway, so he went in and started cleaning the vases. In half an hour, he managed to clean all the crystal displayed in the window, and during that time, 2 customers entered and bought a lot from the merchant. When he finished cleaning everything, he asked the shop owner to give him something to eat. The crystal merchant said, "Let's go have lunch together." He hung a sign on the door, and together they went to a very small cafe at the top of the hill. As soon as they sat at the only table in the place, the crystal merchant smiled and said, "There was no need for you to clean anything. Our tradition requires us to offer food to anyone who is hungry. So why did you let me do this work?" "Because the crystal was dirty, and because you and I both needed to clear our heads of bad thoughts." When they finished eating, the crystal merchant turned to the boy and said, "I would like you to work in my shop. 2 customers came in today while you were cleaning the crystal. That is a good omen." The shepherd thought that people spoke a lot about omens, but they did not really understand what they were talking about. Just like him, he had never noticed that for years he had been speaking with his sheep in a language without words. The merchant insisted on asking, "Would you like to work with me?" The boy said, "I can work for the rest of the day. I will clean all the crystal in the shop until dawn, and in return, you will give me money so that I can be in Egypt tomorrow." Suddenly, the old man burst into laughter. He said, "Even if you clean all the crystal I have for an entire year, and even if you earned a good commission for selling each piece, you would still not have enough money to reach Egypt. Between Tangier and the pyramids, like thousands of kilometers of desert." Silence fell, as though the entire city had suddenly fallen asleep. There were no more shops, no more discussions among merchants, no more calls of the men climbing the minarets, and no more beautiful swords with pearl inlaid handles. Hope for adventure was gone. Gone were the kings, the sheikhs, and the legends. Farewell to the treasure, farewell to the pyramids. It seemed as though the whole world had gone silent, for the boy's spirit fell into silence. There was no pain, no suffering, no disappointment, only an empty gaze through the door of the small cafe and an overwhelming desire to die, to watch everything end at that very moment. The merchant stared at him stunned. It seemed as though all the enthusiasm he had seen in the morning had evaporated suddenly.
The crystal merchant said, "My boy, I can give you money so you can return to your country." The boy remained silent. Then he stood up, straightened his clothes, picked up his pouch, and said, "I will work for you." After another moment of silence, he added, "I need some money to buy some sheep."
Almost a month had passed since the young man began working for the crystal merchant, without finding in the job anything that truly satisfied him. The merchant never stopped grumbling all day long from behind his counter, reminding him to be careful when handling the crystal pieces so he wouldn't break anything. Yet the boy continued working because, although the crystal merchant was an old man who complained endlessly, he was at least fair. The boy had gotten used to receiving a generous commission for every piece sold, and he had already managed to save some money. That morning, he did his calculations. If he kept working at this pace every day, it would take him a whole year to buy just a few sheep. The boy said to his employer, "We should have a crystal display window, and we can put a rack outside to attract the people coming from the bottom of the road." "I've never done anything like this before," the merchant replied. "People might bump into the rack while passing by, and the crystal would break. When I used to wander in the countryside with my sheep, any one of them could always fall victim to a snake bite. But that danger is part of the life of sheep, and part of life." The merchant went to serve a customer who wanted to buy 3 crystal vases. He was now selling much more than before, as if time had turned back to the days when the street was one of Tangier's main attractions. After the customer left, the merchant said to his worker, "People are coming to us constantly now. What we earn is enough for me to live a better life and for you to buy your sheep again soon. Why ask the world for more?" The boy answered without thinking, "Because we must follow the omens." Then he regretted what he had said, for the merchant had never met a king who spoke about the principle of favorability, the beginner's luck, and the personal legend. But the merchant nevertheless understood what the boy meant, because the boy's presence in his shop was itself an omen, and he had never regretted hiring the Spanish boy. Especially now that money was flowing in day after day. Since he had believed for so long that his sales would never increase, he now offered the boy a high commission, and his intuition told him that the boy would soon leave to return to his sheep. To steer the conversation away from omens, he asked, "Why do you want to go see the pyramids?" "Because I've heard so much about them," the boy said, avoiding any mention of his dream. The treasure had become a painful memory, something he struggled to keep from returning to his thoughts. The merchant said, "I don't know anyone here who would cross the desert just to see the pyramids. They're nothing more than a pile of stones. You could build one like them in your own garden." "You've never dreamed of traveling," the boy replied, and then went to serve another customer who entered the shop. 2 days later, the old merchant returned to the topic of the display window. "I don't like change very much. I'm not like that baker down there on the corner. If he makes mistakes in some of his purchases, it doesn't harm him much, but you and I, we must bear the consequences of our mistakes." The boy thought to himself that this was true. The merchant then asked, "Why do you want to build this display window?" "I want to return to my sheep as quickly as possible. When luck is on our side, we must seize the opportunity and do everything we can to help it, just as it helps us. That's what they call the principle of favorability, or beginner's luck." The old man remained silent for a moment and then said, "Our prophet, peace be upon him, taught us the Quran, which only imposes 5 obligations upon us for life. The greatest of them is that there is no God but God. The other 4 obligations are performing 5 daily prayers, fasting during Ramadan, and giving alms to the poor." He fell silent again, his eyes filling with tears as he spoke about the messenger of Islam. He was a man whose heart was filled with faith, and although he sometimes appeared impatient, he did his best to live according to Islamic law. The boy asked, "What is the 5th obligation?" The merchant said, "You told me 2 days ago that you had never dreamed of traveling, but the 5th obligation for every Muslim believer is to undertake a journey. We must travel at least once in our life to the holy land of Mecca." And Mecca is much farther than the pyramids. When I was young, I considered investing the little money I had in opening the shop, hoping to become rich enough someday to travel to Mecca. And in fact, I did start earning money, but I could never leave the shop to anyone else, for crystal is fragile. During all these years, I have watched many people pass in front of this shop on their way to Mecca. There were wealthy pilgrims accompanied by crowds of servants and many camels, but most of them were far poorer than me. They all traveled, and they all returned happy. And they hung banners on the doors of their houses announcing their pilgrimage. One of them was a cobbler who made his living repairing people's shoes. He told me he walked for nearly a year through the desert to complete his pilgrimage. Yet he feels more tired when he has to walk a short distance inside Tangier to buy leather. "Why don't you go to Mecca now?" the boy asked. "Because Mecca is what keeps me alive," the merchant answered. "It's what gives me strength to bear all these identical days, those crystal vases lined on the shelves, and the lunches and dinners in that miserable cafe. I fear that if I achieve my dream, I will have nothing left to live for. You dream of sheep and of the pyramids. You are not like me, because you wish to fulfill your dream, but all I want is to dream of Mecca. I have imagined thousands of times crossing the desert, reaching the sacred stone, circling it 7 times, touching it. I imagined who would be beside me, who would be in front of me, and the prayers and takbirs we would say together. But I fear that my greatest disappointment would be to see it come true, so I prefer to remain with the dream." That very day, the merchant allowed the boy to set up the display window. Not all people can look at their dreams in the same way. A month passed, and the display window attracted a large number of customers to the crystal shop. The boy estimated that if he worked for 6 more months, he could return to Spain and buy 60 sheep, and another 60 on top of that, and thus he would have doubled his flock in less than a year. He could even trade with the Arabs since he had learned their language. Since that memorable morning in the marketplace, he had not used Urim and Thummim at all, for Egypt had become a distant dream, so distant to him as Mecca was to the crystal merchants. Still, he was satisfied with his job, and he never stopped dreaming of the day he would arrive triumphantly in Tarifa. The old king had told him, "Remember that you must always know what you want." And now he knew what he wanted, and he worked toward his goal. Maybe his treasure was simply arriving in this foreign land, falling under the merchant's guidance, and doubling his sheep without spending a single coin. He was proud of himself. He had learned important things: the crystal trade, the language without words, and the omens. One afternoon, he saw a man at the top of the steep road, complaining that there was no suitable place to drink something after climbing the hill. The boy now understood the language of omens. So he went to his employer and said, "We should serve tea to the people who climb all the way up here." "There are many places in which people can drink tea, but here we can serve it in crystal cups. People will taste the tea in a new way, and the crystal will please them. What truly attracts people is beauty." The merchant looked at him for a long moment without saying anything. That same evening, after performing his prayers and closing the shop, he sat on the pavement, invited the boy to join him, and they smoked the nargileh, the strange pipe the Arabs used. Then the old crystal merchant asked, "What is it that you are seeking?" The boy answered, "I told you before. I need to buy a new flock. For that, I need some money."
The old man placed more embers into the hookah, then took a long drag before saying, "For 30 years I have owned this shop. I know good crystal from bad crystal. I know the finest secrets of the trade. I have grown used to my shop, to its size and to its customers. And if you start selling tea in crystal cups, business will grow, and I will have to change my way of life as well. Would that be a good thing? I grew accustomed to my life before you came. I used to think I had wasted my life in the same place while all my friends changed. Their businesses collapsed or flourished, and that used to make me deeply sad. But now I know the truth, that it isn't really like that. The shop is exactly in the state I always wanted it to be. I don't want change because I don't know how to change. And from now on, I know myself." The boy didn't know how to respond, so the old man continued, "You have been a blessing to me, and today I realize something. Every blessing that is rejected becomes a curse. It makes us wish for more and tempts us to touch riches and heights we had never imagined. And now, as I come to know them and know my immense possibilities, I will feel more distressed than ever because I know I could have everything while I don't want it." The boy said to himself, "Luckily, I said nothing to the popcorn seller." They continued smoking the hookah even after the sun had set, speaking in Arabic. The boy felt satisfied with himself because he could now speak Arabic. There was a time when he believed his sheep could teach him everything in life, but sheep don't know Arabic. And as he watched the merchant without saying anything, he thought, there must be other things in life that sheep cannot teach you because they search for nothing but water and food. I don't think it's the sheep that teach, it's me who learns. Finally, the merchant said, "Maktub." "What does that word mean?" asked the boy. "You must have been born an Arab to understand it. Its translation means nothing. It means, it is written." As he extinguished the coals of the hookah, he told the boy he could start offering tea to customers in crystal cups. Sometimes it is impossible to control the river of life. People would climb the steep road and reach its top exhausted, only to find at the summit a shop full of beautiful crystal and refreshing mint tea. When they entered to drink the tea, he served it in exquisite crystal cups. One customer said, "This idea never occurred to my wife." Then he bought several crystal cups because he had guests that night and wanted to astonish them with the elegance of those cups. Another customer confirmed that tea tastes better when served in crystal cups because they preserve its flavor. A third customer said that tea in the East is traditionally served in crystal because of its magical properties. And so the news spread quickly, and people began climbing to the top of the hill to discover the shop that had introduced such novelty into such an old trade. Other shops opened and also began serving tea in crystal cups, but they were not on top of a steep road, so they remained empty. Soon the merchant had to hire 2 new workers, and alongside the crystal, he began importing large quantities of tea, which more and more thirsty men and women drank every day, eager for new things. 6 months passed. The boy woke before sunrise. 1 month and 9 days had passed since he had first set foot in Africa. He wore the Arab robe made of white linen, which he had bought especially for this occasion. He wrapped his head with a turban held by a camel leather band, slipped on his new sandals, and went downstairs without making a sound. The city was still asleep. He made himself a sesame sandwich, drank hot tea in a crystal cup, and sat at the shop's doorstep and began smoking the hookah alone. He smoked in silence, thinking of nothing, hearing nothing but the constant rumbling of the wind carrying the scent of the desert. When he finished, he put his hand in his pocket and paused for a moment, contemplating what he had taken out. A large sum of money, enough to buy 120 sheep, a return ticket, and an import-export license between his country and the one he was in. He waited patiently until the old man awoke and came to open the shop. Then they went together to drink tea. The boy said, "Today I will go. I have enough money to buy the sheep, and you have enough to go to Mecca." The old man said nothing, so the boy insisted, "I want you to bless me. You are the one who helped me." The old man continued preparing tea in silence. After a while, he turned to the boy and said, "I am proud of you. You brought life back into this shop, but I will not go to Mecca, and you know this very well, just as you know that you will not buy any sheep again." The boy asked, stunned, "Who told you that?" "Maktub," said the old crystal merchant simply, and then gave him his blessing.
The boy went to his room and gathered his belongings, filling 3 large handbags. Just before leaving, he noticed his old shepherd's pouch lying in a corner. He had almost forgotten about it. Inside, he found his book and his jacket. He pulled out the jacket, thinking of giving it as a gift to the first boy he met on the road, when 2 stones, Urim and Thummim, rolled to the ground. He remembered the old king and was surprised that he had not thought about him for so long. For a whole year he had worked tirelessly, thinking only of earning enough money so he wouldn't return to Spain with his head lowered. The old king had told him, "Never abandon your dreams. Pay attention to the omens." He gathered Urim and Thummim from the ground, and again felt that strange sense that the old king was near him. He had worked hard all year, and now the omens indicated that the moment of departure had come. He thought, "I will return exactly as I was before. My sheep did not teach me how to speak Arabic, yet they taught me something no less important, that there is a language in the world that everyone understands. I used it all this time to revive the crystal shop. It is the language of enthusiasm. When a person loves something, everything finds meaning. For him, now nothing remains unseen. In the same way he revived this place, he can open the world." Didn't the old king tell him,
when you truly want something, the whole universe conspires to help you achieve it? But the old king did not speak about thieves, about the vast deserts, or about people who know their dreams but do not want to achieve them. He didn't say that the pyramids are nothing but a pile of stones, and anyone can build a pile of stones in his backyard. He also didn't say that when a man has enough money to buy a larger flock than he used to have, he should buy that flock. The boy added the pouch to his bags and went downstairs. He found the old man serving 2 foreign customers, while others in the shop were drinking tea in crystal cups. It was a good start to a workday at such an early hour. For the first time, from where he stood, he noticed that the crystal merchant's hair looked exactly like the old king's. He also remembered the candy seller's smile on his first morning in Tangier, when he had no shelter and no food. That smile, too, reminded him of the king. He thought, as if the king passed through here and left his mark, so no one would think that either of these 2 men had the chance to meet him at some moment in their lives. The king had said he always appears to those who live their personal legend. He left without saying goodbye to the crystal merchant. He didn't want to cry, yet he felt sorrow for that period of his life and for all the beautiful things he had learned. He now felt more confidence in himself, and he felt a desire to set out freely into the world. But I will return to the countryside I already know, and I will tend my sheep again. He was not satisfied with this decision. The dream he had worked for an entire year was losing its importance, little by little, minute by minute. Perhaps because this was not truly his dream after all. Who knows? Maybe it is better for a man to live like the crystal merchant, dreaming without ever fulfilling the dream. But he was holding Urim and Thummim in his hands. These 2 stones filled him with the old king's strength and will. As if by coincidence, or perhaps as a sign, he found himself in the same cafe he had entered on his first day. The thief was not there. The owner served him a cup of tea. He told himself, I can always become a shepherd whenever I want. I've learned to tend sheep and I'll never forget how, but perhaps I will never again get the chance to go all the way to the pyramids of Egypt. There had been a golden breastplate on the old king's chest, and he knew the story of his life. He was a real king, a king of a great land, now only 2 hours away by boat from the fields of Andalusia. But between him and the pyramids lay the desert. He realized he could view the matter differently, that the distance to his dream had decreased by 2 hours, even if a whole year had been lost to earn those 2 hours. I know exactly why I want to return to my sheep. I know them. They don't require much work, and I can love them. But I don't know if I can love the desert. Yet the desert stands between me and my treasure. And if I cannot find it, I can always return to my country. Life has suddenly given me plenty of money, and I have all the time I need. So why not? He suddenly felt an enormous burst of enthusiasm. He could always return to being a crystal merchant. Maybe life hides other treasures. But it had given him a recurring dream, and that doesn't happen to everyone. He was completely satisfied when he left the cafe. He remembered that one of the merchant's suppliers brought crystal by caravans that crossed the desert. He held Urim and Thummim tightly in his fist. Here he was again, returning because of these 2 stones to the path of his treasure. He would lose nothing, absolutely nothing, if he went to the souk to ask whether the pyramids were truly that far away.
The Englishman was sitting inside the building that smelled of livestock, sweat, and dust. It was hard to call that place a warehouse. It was more like a cattle shed. He said to himself, "I've spent my entire life trying to avoid passing through places like this." He absent-mindedly flipped through a chemistry magazine. 10 years of studying just to find myself in a cattle shed? But he had to keep going. He had to believe in the omens, for he had focused his entire life and all his studies on the search for a single universal language spoken by the world. At first, he devoted his attention to Esperanto, then to religions, and finally ended up with alchemy. He could speak Esperanto and had an accurate understanding of various religions, but he had not yet become an alchemist. Without a doubt, he had managed to decipher important things, but his research had reached a point he could not surpass. He had tried, unsuccessfully, to establish a relationship with any alchemist, but alchemists are a strange people. They think only of themselves and always withhold their help. And who knows? Perhaps they had failed in discovering the secret of the great work, the Philosopher's Stone, and that may be the reason they lived in seclusion, committed to silence. He had already spent a large part of the fortune his father left him in a futile pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone. He had visited the best libraries in the world and bought the most important and rarest works on alchemy. In one of those books, he discovered that a famous Arab alchemist had visited Europe several years earlier. It was said that the man was more than 200 years old and had discovered both the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life. This story deeply affected the Englishman. Still, it would have remained just another legend among many others, if not for the fact that one of his friends returned from an archaeological expedition in the desert and told him about an extraordinary Arab man. His friend said, "He lives in the oasis of Al-Fayoum, and people say he is 200 years old and can turn any metal into gold." The Englishman's excitement surged beyond measure. He immediately canceled all his previous commitments, gathered his most important books, and here he was now, inside that place that looked like a cattle shed, while a large caravan outside was preparing to cross the desert. This caravan had to pass through Al-Fayoum. The Englishman thought, "I must meet that damned alchemist." The smell of livestock faded slightly, becoming more bearable. A young Arab man entered carrying many bundles. He greeted the Englishman and asked, "Where are you going?" "To the desert." The Englishman was sitting inside the building that smelled of livestock, sweat, and dust. It was hard to call that place a warehouse. It was more like a cattle shed. He said to himself, "I've spent my entire life trying to avoid passing through places like this." He absent-mindedly flipped through a chemistry magazine. 10 years of studying just to find myself in a cattle shed. But he had to keep going. He had to believe in the omens, for he had focused his entire life and all his studies on the search for a single, universal language spoken by the world. At first, he devoted his attention to Esperanto, then to religions, and finally ended up with alchemy. He could speak Esperanto and had an accurate understanding of various religions, but he had not yet become an alchemist. Without a doubt, he had managed to decipher important things, but his research had reached a point he could not surpass. He had tried, unsuccessfully, to establish a relationship with any alchemist, but alchemists are a strange people. They think only of themselves and always withhold their help. And who knows, perhaps they had failed in discovering the secret of the great work, the Philosopher's Stone, and that may be the reason they lived in seclusion, committed to silence.
He had already spent a large part of the fortune his father left him in a futile pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone. He had visited the best libraries in the world and bought the most important and rarest works on alchemy. In one of those books, he discovered that a famous Arab alchemist had visited Europe several years earlier. It was said that the man was more than 200 years old and had discovered both the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life. This story deeply affected the Englishman, and still it would have remained just another legend among many others, if not for the fact that one of his friends returned from an archaeological expedition in the desert and told him about an extraordinary Arab man. His friend said, "He lives in the oasis of Al-Fayoum, and people say he is 200 years old and can turn any metal into gold." The Englishman's excitement surged beyond measure. He immediately canceled all his previous commitments, gathered his most important books, and here he was now inside that place that looked like a cattle shed, while a large caravan outside was preparing to cross the desert. This caravan had to pass through Al-Fayoum. The Englishman thought, "I must meet that damned alchemist." The smell of livestock faded slightly, becoming more bearable. A young Arab man entered, carrying many bundles. He greeted the Englishman and asked, "Where are you going?" "To the desert," the Englishman replied, then returned to his reading. He was not in the mood for conversation. He needed to recall everything he had learned over 10 years, because the alchemist would undoubtedly put him through some kind of test. The young Arab picked up a book and began to read as well. The book was in Spanish. The Englishman thought, "This is an opportunity. My Spanish is better than my Arabic, and if this boy is going to Al-Fayoum, I will have someone to talk to when I'm not busy with important matters." The boy, meanwhile, tried once again to read the burial scene that begins the story. How strange, he thought. It's been almost 2 years since I began reading this book, yet I still can't get past these pages. He couldn't concentrate, even though there was no king to interrupt him. He was still uncertain about his decision. But now he realized something important. Decisions are nothing but the beginning of something, and when a person makes a decision, he truly throws himself into a mighty current that leads him to places he never imagined, not even in his dreams, at the very moment he makes that decision. When I chose to go search for my treasure, I never imagined I would end up working in a crystal shop. And likewise, this caravan may be a decision I've made, but its end remains a mystery. Across from him sat a European man reading as well. An unpleasant man who looked at him with disdain when he entered. They could have become friends, but the European rejected him immediately. The boy closed his book. He didn't want to do anything that might make anyone think he resembled that European. He pulled out the Urim and Thummim stones from his pocket and began to play with them. The stranger let out a cry. "Urim and Thummim!" The boy quickly put the stones back in his pocket, saying, "They're not for sale. They're not worth much. Just 2 pieces of crystal. There are millions of crystals on Earth. But these," he added for someone who knew their value, "these are Urim and Thummim. I didn't know they existed in this region. A king gave them to me." The stranger remained silent. Then he reached into his pocket and with a trembling hand pulled out 2 identical stones to the ones the boy had. He said, "You spoke of a king, but you wouldn't believe that a king could speak to a shepherd." "That's what happened," the boy replied as he moved past him. This time he ended the conversation. But the stranger, instead of doubting, said the opposite. "There's nothing strange about kings speaking to shepherds." At that moment, the boy felt happy to be in this place. The Englishman said, as though thinking out loud,
Perhaps this is a sign. You spoke earlier of omens. The boy's excitement was growing by the minute. The Englishman closed the magazine he was reading and said, "Everything in life is an omen. The whole world is governed by one universal language. Everyone understands it, but people have forgotten it. I am searching for this universal language among other things. That is why I am here. I must meet a man who knows this language. He is an alchemist." Their conversation stopped when a fat Arab man entered the warehouse. "You're both lucky," he said. "The caravan will depart this afternoon towards Al-Fayoum." "But I want to go to Egypt," the boy said. The fat man replied, "And Al-Fayoum is in Egypt. You seem like a strange Arab brother." "He's Spanish," the boy said. The Englishman felt pleased. Even though the boy was dressed like an Arab, at least he was European. The Englishman added after the man left, "He calls omens luck. If I could, I'd write a massive encyclopedia on the words luck and coincidence. Those two words write the language of the world." Then he continued, speaking to the boy, "It was no coincidence that I saw you holding Urim and Thummim. Tell me, are you also seeking to meet the alchemist?" The young man replied, "I am seeking a treasure," and immediately felt regret. But the Englishman did not seem to pay any attention to what he had heard and said, "So am I, in a way. And I don't even know what alchemy truly is," said the boy, just as the head of the tent entered and invited them to leave. A tall, bearded man with black eyes said, "I am the leader of this caravan, and I hold the right of life and death over everyone I lead, because the desert is a fickle woman who can drive men mad." There were nearly 200 people and twice as many animals: camels, horses, mules, birds. There were women and some men who carried swords at their waists or long rifles on their shoulders. The Englishman had brought with him several bags stuffed with books. A loud commotion filled the place, and the leader had to repeat his words several times so everyone could understand them. He said, "There are people here from many different backgrounds, each believing in different gods. As for me, my only God is Allah, and I swear by Allah that I will do all that I can and the best I can to conquer this desert once more. All I ask from each of you is that you swear by the God you believe in and from the depths of your heart that you will obey under all circumstances. For in the desert, disobedience means only death." A faint murmur spread through the crowd, and each person swore softly, mentioning their God. The boy swore by Christ, while the Englishman remained silent. The murmuring went on longer than a normal oath, for the people were also seeking heaven's protection. Then a horn sounded, echoing for a long time. Everyone mounted their animals. The boy and the Englishman had bought 2 camels and were struggling to keep their balance on their mounts. The boy felt a little pity for the Englishman's camel, burdened with the heavy load of books. The Englishman said, trying to resume the conversation he had begun in the tent, "There are no coincidences. A friend of mine is the one who made me come here, because he knows an Arab." But the caravan had begun to move, and it became impossible to hear what he was saying. Still, the boy had understood the meaning completely. The Englishman meant that strange chain that connects everything to everything else. The same chain that had carried the boy from being a shepherd to working in the crystal shop. He thought, the closer a person comes to achieving his dream, the more his personal legend becomes the true reason for living. The caravan was heading east. It moved in the morning, and stopped when the sun grew hot, then resumed when the sun leaned westward. The boy did not talk much with the Englishman, who spent most of the time immersed in his books. The boy devoted himself to watching the procession of animals and people crossing the desert. Everything was completely different from the day of departure. Back then, there had been noise, crowds, children crying, water tanks, and merchants shouting. But in the desert, there was nothing except eternal wind, silence, and the sound of the animals' footsteps. Even the guides rarely spoke to one another. One evening, a young camel driver said, "I have crossed these seas of sand many times, but the desert is vast, distant, endless. It makes a man feel small and forces him into silence." The boy understood what the camel driver meant, even though he had never crossed any desert before. Yet every time he stared at the sea or at fire, he could spend hours without uttering a word, absorbed by the abyss and majesty of the elements. He thought, "I learned from my sheep, and I learned from the crystal. I can also learn from the desert, which seems ancient and full of wisdom." The wind never stopped blowing, and he remembered the day he had felt this same wind in Tarifa when he sat on the fortress wall. Perhaps this very wind was now brushing the wool of the sheep that roamed through Andalusia. He said to himself, "They are no longer my sheep." He did not feel deep longing. Surely they had grown used to a new shepherd and forgotten him. And that was fine. Anyone who lives the life of a traveler, like sheep do, knows that there always comes a time when one must part ways. Then he remembered the merchant's daughter and became convinced she must already be married, perhaps to the popcorn seller or a shepherd who could read and tell her wonderful stories. He was certainly not the only one. But this intuition troubled him. Could he be on the path to learning that universal language that knows the past and present of all people? His mother used to say, "My intuition never fails." And he began to understand that moments of intuition are the soul diving swiftly into the universal life stream, where the stories of all humans are woven together in a way that unites everything. Thus we can know everything, because everything is written. He thought of the crystal merchant as he said this to himself. The desert sometimes stretched as sand, and at other times as stone. When the caravan reached rocky ground, they circled around it. If there was a mass of rocks forcing a wide detour, they followed it. When they encountered very soft sand that swallowed the camel's hooves, they searched for firmer ground. Sometimes the earth was covered in salt, the remains of an ancient lake. The camels struggled, so the drivers would dismount and help them, carrying loads on their own backs, until they cleared the difficult passage, then reloading the camels. When a guide fell ill or died, the drivers drew lots to choose who would replace him. All of this had only one explanation. It did not matter how often the caravan changed its path, as long as it continued toward the same goal. And whenever they overcame an obstacle, they followed once again the star that guided them toward the oasis. When people saw that star shining in the dawn sky, they knew it pointed them to where women, water, palm trees, and dates awaited. The Englishman alone noticed none of this. He spent most of his time deeply absorbed in his books. The boy also had a book. He tried reading it during the first days of the journey, but he found greater pleasure in watching the caravan and listening to the wind. Once he learned to control his camel better and began to grow fond of it, he threw away the book. It was extra weight he didn't need. Still, something tempted him because every time he opened that book, he had met someone important.
In the end, he formed a friendship with the camel driver who rode beside him and told him his life.
He said, "I live in a village near Karun. I have my home, my children, and a stable life that was meant to remain the same until the day I die. One year, the harvest was better than usual, so we all traveled to Mecca, and I performed the pilgrimage, the only duty that was still missing from my life at that time. Afterwards, I could have died in peace, and that made me happy. Then one day, the ground began to shake, and the Nile overflowed, destroying its banks. Something happened to me that I had always thought happened only to other people. My neighbors feared that the flood would destroy their olive groves. My wife feared the waters would sweep away our children, and I feared losing everything I had built in my life. But what happened had no remedy, and the land was no longer suitable for cultivation. I was forced to find another way to live, and here I am today, a camel driver. But I was also able to understand God's wisdom. A person should not fear the unknown, for every person is capable of changing his life and obtaining what he needs. Everything we fear is simply the loss of what we possess, whether it is our life or our crops. But this fear disappears when we understand that our lives and the life of the world were both written by His hand, the Almighty. Sometimes caravans would meet when night fell, and one caravan would always have something another caravan needed, proof that everything is written by God's hand. Camel drivers exchanged information about sandstorms, and they gathered around campfires to tell stories about the desert. At other times, mysterious men would arrive with veiled faces. These were the Bedouins who guarded the caravan routes. They brought information about bandits and rebellious tribes. They were used to arriving silently and leaving silently, wrapped in their cloaks and head coverings that revealed nothing but their eyes. During one of these nighttime gatherings, the camel driver joined the boy and the Englishman before a campfire they were sitting around. The camel driver said, "There are rumors of a war about to break out between the tribes." The three men fell silent, and the Spanish boy noticed that a kind of fear had spread, even though no one spoke a word. After a moment, the Englishman asked whether there was any danger. The camel driver replied, "Anyone who ventures into the desert cannot turn back, and since retreat is impossible, one should worry about nothing except for the best way to move forward. The rest is in God's hands, including the danger." Then he ended his words with that magical word, Maktub. It is written. After the camel driver left, the boy said to the Englishman, "You should pay more attention to the caravan. It veers off its path often, yet it always ends up moving toward the same point." The Englishman replied, "And you should read more books about the world. Books are like maps." From that moment, the long caravan of men and animals began to move faster. Silence no longer belonged to the day alone. It extended to the night as well, at the hour when men usually gathered to talk around the fire. Little by little, the silence imposed itself. One day, the caravan leader decided that no more fires were to be lit at night, so as not to attract attention. After that, the travelers slept in a circle formed by the animals, trying to draw warmth from them to resist the cold of the night. The caravan leader assigned a few armed guards around the camp. The Englishman became anxious as he and the boy gazed together at the nearby dunes. It was a night when the moon was full. The boy told the Englishman his entire story. The Englishman showed particular interest in the period the boy spent working in the shop, which had begun to prosper day after day during the boy's time there. He said to him, "That is the principle that governs everything, what we call alchemy, the soul of the world. When you want something with all your heart, you draw closer to the soul of the world, and that is always a positive force." Then he added, "This isn't a gift exclusive to humans. Everything in existence has a soul as well, whether plant, animal, mineral, or even a mere idea." He continued, "Everything beneath the earth or above it never stops moving because the earth is a living being and it has a soul. We rarely realize that this soul works in our favor. But you should know that even the crystal vases in the shop worked for your success." The boy watched the moon and the white sands, remaining silent for a while. Then he finally said, "I have watched the caravan crossing the desert, speaking the same language as the desert itself. That is why it allows it to cross. The desert never stops testing every single step of the caravan to know if those steps are in total harmony with it or not. If they are, the caravan reaches the oasis. But if one of us, despite all his courage, fails to understand that language, he dies the very first day." They continued contemplating the moonlight together for a while. Then the boy continued, "That is the magic of signs. I have seen how the guides read the signs of the desert and how the soul of the caravan speaks to the soul of the desert." After a moment, it was the Englishman's turn to speak. He said, "I really should pay more attention to the caravan." The boy answered, "And you should read my books." They were indeed strange books, speaking of Mercury, salt, dragons, and kings, but he understood nothing at all. Still, there was one idea that kept recurring in all the books. The idea that all things are manifestations of one single thing. He discovered in one of the books that the most important text in alchemy was written on a simple emerald. The Englishman proudly explained this to him, happy to be teaching his companion something. He said, "That is the emerald tablet. So why would you need all these books just to understand those few lines?" But the Englishman didn't seem convinced. The book that most fascinated the boy was the one telling stories of famous alchemists, men who spent their entire lives purifying metals in their laboratories. They believed that if a person continued heating a metal for years and years, that metal would eventually rid itself of all its known properties, leaving behind nothing but the soul of the world. This unique substance would allow the alchemist to understand everything that exists on the face of the earth, because it is the language through which things communicate with each other. This discovery, which they call the master work, consists of two parts, one liquid and one solid. The boy asked, "Isn't it enough to observe people and signs to understand this language?" The Englishman responded angrily, "You are obsessed with simplification. Alchemy is serious work, and every step of the process must be followed precisely, exactly as the masters taught." The young man discovered that the liquid part of the great work was called the elixir of life, and that this elixir not only cured diseases, but also shielded the alchemist from old age. As for the solid part, it was called the philosopher's stone. The Englishman said to him, "It is not easy to discover the philosopher's stone. Alchemists spent many years in their laboratories watching the fire that purified metals. And as they kept staring into the fire, something gradually seeped into the depths of their hearts, a detachment from all the vanities of the world, until the day they realized that purifying the metal had, in fact, purified their own souls." At that moment, the young man remembered the crystal merchant who had once told him that cleaning the crystal had been a good thing because it freed him from two bad ideas. The boy grew more convinced that it must be possible to learn alchemy from daily life. The Englishman continued, "In addition to that, the philosopher's stone has a completely unique property. A single shard of it is enough to transform large quantities of base metal into gold." From that moment on, the young man's interest in alchemy grew tremendously, and he thought that with a little patience, he could turn anything into gold. He read about the different figures the Englishman had mentioned: Helios, Venus, Eli, Vulcan, and Geber. Their stories were fascinating. They had all lived out their personal legends to the very end. They traveled, met scholars, performed miracles before the eyes of those who did not believe them, and attained the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. But when the young man tried to understand for himself how to accomplish the great work, he found himself at a dead end. There was nothing but drawings, symbols, and mysterious texts. One night he asked the Englishman, "Why do they use a language so difficult to understand?" He also noticed, on that particular occasion, that the Englishman was in a very bad mood, as if he missed his books. The Englishman replied, It's so that only those who are responsible enough to deserve understanding can understand it. Imagine for a moment that everyone started turning lead into gold. Soon, gold would be worthless. Only great minds and determined seekers can accomplish the great work. And that is why I am here in this desert, because I want to meet a real alchemist who can help me decipher the symbols. He added, and when were those books written? Think about it. At that time, the printing press had not yet been invented, and it was impossible for everyone to have access to alchemical knowledge. So why then all this strange language and all these numbers? Despite the boy's insistence, the Englishman did not answer the question. He only said that he had been observing the caravan closely for several days and had not discovered anything new except one thing: the increasing talk of war. One day, the boy returned the books to the Englishman. The man asked eagerly, "Well, did you learn much?" The Englishman needed someone to talk to forget his fear of the coming war. The boy said, "I learned that the world has a soul, and that whoever understands this soul can understand the language of things. I learned that many alchemists lived their personal legends, and that they eventually discovered the soul of the world, the philosopher's stone, and the elixir of life. But what I learned most of all is that these things are so simple that they could be engraved on a single emerald." The Englishman was disappointed. The boy was not impressed by years of study, nor by magical symbols, nor by the difficult words that required deep understanding, nor by the complex laboratory devices. He said to himself, "He must be too simple-minded to understand these things." He gathered his books and placed them in a sack hanging from the camel's back. Then he said to the boy, "Go back to your caravan. It too has not taught me much." The young man began contemplating the dreadful silence of the desert and the sand stirred by the animals as they walked. He said to himself, "Each person has his own way of learning. His way is not my way, but both of us are pursuing our own personal legends, and for that I respect him." The caravan continued traveling day and night. More and more masked messengers began to appear at every moment. The camel driver, who had become the boy's friend, explained that the tribal war had already begun, and that if they managed to reach the oasis, they would be lucky. The animals were exhausted, and the men grew even more silent. At night, the silence became frightening, because when a camel suddenly roared, something that had been nothing more than a camel's call could now fill everyone's heart with fear, for it might be a sign of an imminent attack. Yet, the camel driver did not seem excessively disturbed by the approaching danger of war. He told the boy as he ate a handful of dates on a moonless night lit by no campfires, "I am alive, and when I eat, I do nothing but eat. And when it's time to walk, I walk. That's all. And if one day I must die, then any day is as good as another to die. I do not live in the past or the future. I live only in the present, and the present alone helps me." If you can always live in the present, you will be a happy man. You will understand that there is life in the desert and stars in the sky, and that warriors fight because it is part of human life. And when you understand this, life becomes a celebration, a great festival, because it is exactly the moment we are living now and nothing else. 2 nights later, when the boy was about to fall asleep, he looked at the guiding star the caravan followed. It seemed to him that the horizon was dropping, for the desert sky was filled with hundreds of stars. The camel driver said, "That is the oasis." "Then why don't we go to it now?" he asked. "Because we need to sleep," he replied.
The young man opened his eyes as the sun began to rise from the horizon. In the place where tiny stars had sparkled during the night, an endless forest of palm trees now stretched before his eyes, filling the entire horizon of the desert. The Englishman, who had just woken up as well, shouted excitedly, "We've arrived!" The boy remained silent. The desert had taught him silence. He was content with simply watching the palms in front of him. He still had a long journey ahead before reaching the pyramids, and this morning would, for him, one day be nothing more than a memory. But for now, it was the present moment, the festival the caravan driver had spoken about, and he tried to live this moment with the lessons of his past and the dreams of his future. Yes, the sight of those thousands of palm trees would one day become only a memory. But in this moment, it meant shade, water, and refuge from war. Just as a camel's sudden roar could turn into a warning of danger, a forest of palm trees could represent a miracle. And the boy thought that the world spoke more than one language. The alchemist thought, when the rhythm of time speeds up, the caravans hurry as well. He watched hundreds of people and animals arriving at the oasis. The inhabitants rushed forward, shouting and cheering to welcome the newcomers, while clouds of dust rose and hid the desert sun. The children jumped around excitedly at the sight of foreigners. The alchemist watched the caravan leaders gather to welcome the head of the caravan, then hold a long meeting together. None of this mattered to the alchemist. He had seen before how crowds arrived and departed, while the oasis and the desert remained unchanged. He had seen kings and beggars cross those stretches of sand, whose shapes changed with the wind, yet remained, in essence, the same as they had been when he was a child. And yet, he could not completely suppress the joy that every traveler feels when, after endless yellow earth and blue sky, the green of palm trees suddenly appears. He said to himself, perhaps the desert was created so that humans could enjoy the sight of palm forests. Then
he decided to focus on practical matters.